Cool. We're just getting going. So the status update about the demo setup, I didn't have anything to contribute to that. I think it's fallen kind of by the wayside with other priorities. I know that I think we're actually, so with SLO Conf coming up, and it being the anniversary for the announcement of OpenSLO, it's already 1 year old. That's awesome. Yeah, I think we want to try and get something going for that. JB here is going to be helping us from the Noble 9 side, devoting some of his time to working on OpenSLO issues. And I think one of the goals we have with that is getting us compatible, or Noble 9 compatible with fully with the OpenSLO spec, and then getting an end-to-end demo there. So we're kind of rolling this goal up into that. But this is also probably a good point to plug OpenSLO, or sorry, SLO Conf, if anybody hasn't heard of it already. So shameless plug. Did anybody have any questions about that?
I feel like we've touched on it a couple times in some of the previous meetings. I don't think we've really finalized on like what functionality we're hoping to hit in that kind of this stable version. But if there are things that that you guys have in mind that are like you would really like to have in that first stable version, or things that we should be working towards for that first stable version, I think that's the kind of stuff we want to discuss here obviously, but then also in the Slack, just so that we can start figuring out what that feature set looks like. And doesn't have to be the first major version per se. It's just the first version where, again, we're like, us as a vendor, we want to make sure we support as much as possible the spec, so that we can start, just having that full end-to-end compatibility on our side. But
in the OpenSLO GitHub project, there's also a 1.0 project that you guys can take a look at. We have the to-do items are the ones that we've taken as kind of what we want to consider the 1.0 milestone. So if there's anything that anyone wants to add, subtract, we can just talk about that, bring it up in the Slack channel, or bring it up here.
I would like to get that. There was I think Giannis had a PR that we'd talked about way back last year, a little bit about the standardizing of durations. And that's something I would like to see land, but we don't have to talk about that right now. We can talk about that later.
Cool. Cool. And it looks like there was a PR too for the SLI as a separate kind. And I think that just I'm not sure, I think who submitted that, but we've been wanting to,
by a colleague of mine at Workday, I believe.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Hi, by the way, Ken.
Hi. Sorry, I was a bit late joining.
All good. Okay, yeah, so we're just going to take a look at that and see if anybody had any comments, questions, concerns on that so far. I just kind of came across this yesterday, I think it was, or today. Because just on first glance, I think it looks good.
Certainly makes sense to me.
Yeah. Okay.
Have we had a meeting where we've actually like introed the new maintainer folks?
No.
No.
That might be good to do.
Sort of Marius is, I feel like, trying not to get pointed at, but it's too late. It's too late.
I had a similar problem, as I'm guessing, like from the sound of it, a bunch of people hear it, and that like suddenly work happened come January, and like I've like fell off the face of the earth the past like month.
Totally.
And a
No, I
half
mean,
or
and I think
something.
we've all kind of gone through that, and that's part of why we wanted to start opening up the project to more maintainers, because we have also been getting sidetracked with work stuff. So part of that new group is Marius and Weert. And then Giannis, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I don't want to butcher it. Giannis G, though, is also part of that group. And who am I missing? Matt from Continuo.io, which the TLDR here is just that we've got more folks that can help kind of do this review process, more folks so we can have more of these discussions, both in the Slack channel and on the pull requests themselves. So hopefully that helps unblock some of the long-lived PRs that we've had where we haven't been able to get a look at them. But thank you, Marius and Weird, very much.
Well,
it's really appreciated.
Yeah, like the big round of applause on that, and really appreciate the work and the time on that.
It's hard to do like Zoom, like, but yes, thank you very much. I think that's to me, it feels like a healthy move for the project, right? We want more like diverse opinions, and we want more folks to just help us contribute.
Actually, once like we're done with the agenda, I'd like to demo a proof of concept that uses OpenSLO. I was supposed to do it last month, but I didn't have any chance, and I didn't
amazing.
I didn't have time to prepare it, so I'll just try to remember how the code worked and how to show it. So
live demos. Brave man, Marius, brave man.
Living on the edge.
Yeah, yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. I will add it. I'll just add it here. Okay. All right. So unless anybody had any other comments about the SLI as a separate kind, we'll keep the comments and discussion in the PR. And then it looks like we had, where did you have?
Yeah, so about this SLI PR, so how much time do we want to give it? If there's like no feedback, we're going to merge it then? It's like no feedback is good news, or do we then like close it and wait for another proposal? What's the plan regarding potentially accepting the PR?
Let's give it a couple days, because I just because in this is a somewhat significant change. Breaking off and creating a new kind is going to be a fairly big chunk. So let's just have a couple of days to let this bake and think about it, and allow people to have feedback on it.
I guess. Oh, sorry. Well, one of the things I think that this, maybe I'll add it to the list, but like when we have these big changes, and we've had a few recently, which is again good for the spec to grow. We don't have a great process yet for combining that with OSLO, and it does seem like one of those things that we should try to figure out how we want to standardize that. It's like kind of a chicken and egg problem, right? But it does leave one project in the lurch when we have these big changes. That's all.
Yes, and I think maybe one way we can handle that is making sure that we're versioning the spec correctly, and as we're making these updates, we're specing or versioning the spec, and also then having OSLO run against a certain version of that spec too, so that we don't produce these breaking changes. And I will make a note of that in the agenda and make a action item for.
I beat you to it. Oh, never mind. I put it in the agenda.
No. Okay.
Yeah, no, action item's good. Action item's good.
But yeah, so where, to your point, maybe actually a week would be good. So like maybe like next Thursday.
Yeah, I want to post that.
Yeah.
I just wondering, do we want to go through the existing tickets and what we want to do about those? Or...
Yeah, that looks like, let's do that. Let's do it right after the so really quick, the duration format, was there anything to say about this ticket?
I think we kind of like discussed the moving to shorthand duration a few meetings ago, and I think that it's still the direction that I mean, it still seems like the right direction to go. I think something we missed was calendar aligned SLOs, and the duration doesn't work quite as well there, just in that you still have this other additional metadata that needs to live somewhere, like when the quarter starts kind of vibe, right? If you're looking like fiscal quarterly based SLOs, that usually has a start date, that usually has a time zone related to it. And so just something like, and honestly, like even things like a quarter might not always be the same number of days. It might be like a certain number of months, and then those months might not be the same number of days. And so figuring out how we want to, include that still seems like something that I think it's PR 93. Giannis and I were discussing a little bit there. I think we had some conversations in Slack as well, and just wanted to bring it up to the larger group to see how folks felt about that. I think that the TLDR being that like we're probably going to need still some discrepancy in different duration types, so we can have that shorthand for maybe for known like rolling durations, but then for more specifically defined ones, we might need a different, I guess, object to sort of wrap all of that metadata.
So one sort of thing that you could look at as a that might give some inspiration is, I don't know if you're aware of Grafana. You know, you get the time ranges in Grafana, and it has this kind of hidden feature where you can put like a slash and then a M for month or /D for day, and it will align. So you can say it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you say, you know, now minus 14 days, and then you do /D. And that will align to basically the beginning of the day. And with that syntax, with that slash kind of truncate date to this unit, you can actually do lots of different things. Like you can align that to to the month, or I do all sorts of things like that. And you can actually say like the last 3 months up until, you know, this, and we use that a lot for our error budgeting. So we can see like a 90-day period up to the beginning of the month. And it won't, I mean, there's a lot of other cases, but that sort of syntax, try, you know, next time using Grafana, if you ever use it, go play around with the slash syntax, and it might give you enough flexibility in a shorthand format.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. I think that the time zone stuff still feels a little funky, but I like that sort of auto alignment based on just like, and then it's kind of more up to the platform, I guess, to determine, to like recognize like where the month starts and stuff like that.
Yeah. If you have like a /M, it'll basically go to, you know, so if you said now /M, it'll be the 1st of February, for example. But yeah, there's a time zone sort of element there, but yeah, that's another question, I think.
I guess, do folks agree that that type of information should even be part of an SLO definition? Like if we had like a calendar aligned SLO, that it should include things like that, or it should be up to, like, that should be a separate metadata that lives elsewhere?
There's a part of me which thinks it's kind of opening a Pandora's box, because then there's going to be someone who's like, hey, I want Easter. And, you know, and it's like, do you kind of go down that route, or do you just stick to the like really straightforward durations and sort of, you know, or do you want to kind of, because obviously if you're going to be quarter aligned, like you said, like for companies, they're going to have that on their quarters, which are based on their financial years. And that's like a whole sort of can of worms in that as alone. So it really like kind of,
the previous spec had, or like the version of the spec right now, before the PR is merged, has like essentially like a start time and a time zone to sort of delineate that. But I agree with you that, yeah, there's a lot of, edge cases that this can kind of lead into. And so like
time zone seems pretty like necessary. Like edge cases, we can discuss which edge cases we want to support, whether it makes sense, Pandora's box, etc. But like time zone is a basic requirement when it comes to calendar aligned date specifications.
got it.
So at a minimum, that needs to be there.
Okay, yeah, then I guess I'll
Yeah.
I'll repost this pull request in the Slack channel if folks are interested in taking a look. I feel like we can figure out the right set of metadata to include and probably have it be more or less, optional fields, right? Depending on whether the duration is demarked as rolling or calendar aligned. Maybe. That's all. That's my whole spiel on that.
All right. Cool. So got that. So now take a let's take a look at the tickets here that we have. Actually, I don't have this set up. Mike, are you able to show your screen and show the tickets?
Yeah, I should be able to. Let me. Oh, am I the owner?
Oh,
I don't know. Yeah, let me. This one?
yeah, there you go.
Seems to work. Cool. And so we wanted to run through issues.
Yeah, to see what issues we have.
Cool.
Sorry, I'm going over there right now. Oh yeah, this one was from Ken to create the CRDs.
Yeah, it's something I might look at doing once the separate SLO kind of separation has happened, because that'll be a big change. So this will be a lot easier once that's already happened, rather than trying to take that into account as to what's there today.
So is the idea to pull that you would want to pull in the SLI and the SLO into Kubernetes, or are you just like looking at that by that?
Well, I think that would help with, and I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation, Pyra, the Prometheus generator for SLOs, SLIs. They have their own dashboard stuff. Right now, they have their own schema because they started doing that before OpenSLO existed. And they're all about, when you have a new SLI, you create a Kubernetes resource based on their CRD, and it auto adds everything into the UI and generates the Prometheus rules and all that kind of stuff. So it would certainly fit very nicely into that. But I was also thinking from the perspective of almost having a validatable schema without necessarily having to use the OSLO tool, that you could then do other things through that.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
There is also an issue about a queue schema as well that I saw, which is sort of seems to tie in with this quite heavily.
Yeah, and I think like with both of these, one of the ideas that we had is that as we do kind of default to the YAML format, but you could implement this in any number of formats like JSON, Q, whatever. And I would hope that we'd be able to accomplish that level of flexibility in there. But yeah, I think being able to just have those in the CRDs that you're talking about and have them kind of adhere to an existing format, so we wouldn't have to use OSLOs, is an interesting one. Or at least use it also for the validation.
Basically, we can even make a one step further when we define schema, which is marshallable to the JSON, and you know, basically like everything speaks now. And even when we, for example, make a standardization of the name of the endpoint, OSLO may be promoted from just validating to the universal CLI for submitting SLO definition to the any basically backend which implements this endpoint by choosing the URL, by passing to it the URL where to submit, because by the end of the day, everything basically ends as a JSON on the wire. Just, you know, code.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, let's keep this one. I like this. Anybody else have anything to say on that one before we move to the next issue? And actually, you know what? I think we have too many to go through with like the demo and everything. So let's see. Actually, let's say it a different. Let's do this a different way and use everyone's time kind of more. You know, I want to be cognizant of people's time. Is there any issues that people want to talk about and bring up? Okay. Okay, I don't think there's anything here that is too
interesting. A lot of these, interestingly to me, are like kind of tagged for that V1. So I feel like this could, as we start to discuss that stuff, or if there are things that are like that you'd really want to see in that first stable version, we can use that as that kickstarting discussion guide, and we can again talk about these more in the Slack stuff or with PRs or whatever.
So actually, the one that I want to bring up is at the very top, number 41. Right now, it's at the top of your screen. This one,
aggregation.
Yes. So this is one that actually we're talking about internally. And I think this came out of one of our discussions with the captain team. I think Andrew, you might have been part of that too, if I remember correctly.
Not me.
Not you. Okay. But yeah, just the idea of bringing many SLOs together or SLIs. And this is one we might want to keep an eye on, because there's a lot of different approaches, and I'm kind of curious if people have thoughts on this or use cases for aggregate SLOs.
I have a ton of thoughts, but
yes,
I feel like you and I talk about this already. So
yeah,
I'm happy to.
It's certainly something we've been talking about internally at Workday over the last couple of months. For a couple of different perspectives. One is the ability for an SLO to have multiple SLIs to capture that whole user journey of, you might have indicators for pieces of services, but the whole user journey is a single SLO. But then also probably more common kind of aggregation view of having SLOs for modules within a much larger service, and wanting to roll that up into a view of, okay, there might be 10 components, each with their own SLO. What's like the SLO for the thing that actually encompasses them all, to give you that view of, is there something wrong in this big block? Okay, what's wrong in the minor components within it, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think Marius, you and I discussed this a little bit as well around, I feel like it's kind of mentioned down here, but then, and I think we did kind of get into this, but like one of those blocks might be essentially like latency across a bunch of different systems, right? Where you just want an aggregate view of like, how is network latency doing across the board when it's essentially populated from all of these different, like individual workflows and stuff like that. But then you could get that overview. It's always going to be a little you'll have some interesting artifacts there. Looking at like anytime you try to squash, get that single view of health sort of world. But I think that's part of the interesting challenge of like the budgeting here and how we want to do weighting and how you want to, you know, account for that customization. Was that, did we talk about that, Marius, or am I completely? You don't know. Yeah.
It's been like 3 months or 2 months at this point, so we talked about a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I think there was a
don't-
meeting a while back that it was just you, me, and Ian, and we were just like brainstorming for like an hour, which was
Yeah.
awesomely fun for me. But yeah. I think the thing that I would want to keep in mind as we start looking at this stuff is, from a spec point of view, I would personally like to be able to denote the different ways that the budgeting is managed, because you're going to have things where you're looking at, is every like child SLO that's part of an aggregate equal, or are you going to want to have different weighting, or are you going to want to, if some of them are time slice based and some of them are like raw count based, like do you want to, you know, essentially like squash everything in individual intervals, and so finding a way to have essentially allow like implementations to denote which budgeting method they want. It's very similar to what I think we're doing for other SLIs. I think will be really useful, but it'll just be like a little bit more specific to aggregate level budgeting.
We do a lot of this at GitLab. We have a single set of SLIs, and then we aggregate them in lots of different ways, sort of through reliability, and then also to the what we call stage groups, which are the teams that are kind of contributing to the monolith. And we wrote up this whole thing, and I'm just madly trying to find it. And if I find it before the end of the meeting, I'll post it.
Okay.
Because it's quite a good representation of how we have like multiple levels of that sort of aggregation rolling. And we used to do weighting, and we've kind of moved, to keep things simpler, we've actually moved to just using the total count as the weighting in every case. So if you're mixing multiple SLIs, you're kind of adding up all the bottom and then all the top, and it's much easier than trying to do weighting, because then it sort of feels a bit artificial. But let me try find it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the method that I've used in the past as well, where you essentially, it's just like flat out like we're only going to use counts, and so you've got all of your good over all of your total, and it does make things quite easy. But then obviously like the result there is that it's weighted towards whatever workflows have the most traffic on them, right? Which maybe that's the right thing to do. You're biasing towards the workflows where if they're down, they're going to affect the most traffic. But yeah, it's always an interesting set.
That's interesting. I'm wondering if that, in that situation, whether you could have a place where the higher level is green, but a lower level is red because it's outweighed by the good in others.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we definitely have that. So we actually have little indicators on each of the components. So we have sort of components rolling up into services and then rolling up and up and up. And sometimes you'll see a component that's like firing, it's in violation, but the service as a whole isn't. And we use that as a signal. So if the entire service, if everything in the service is burning up, it's a different signal to, this one component that's very sort of specific to, say image scaling or something like that. We know, this probably isn't an overall problem, but if everything's burning up, then it's probably a database or Redis or something behind the scenes.
And I think the same way that you have different like ways to calculate error budget for alerting, having that differentiation in aggregations is going to be useful because essentially like users can choose what type of aggregate they're looking at. If they want something to be more weighted towards false negatives, in like this scenario of like, hey, there's something downstream that's not super healthy, but overall the system's pretty good and you don't want to get paid for that, then you can choose this type of budgeting method that's weighted towards the higher traffic points. But then alternatively, other users might want SLOs that are more sensitive, like they're more likely to give you any individual failure in the system will always fail the upper system, right? So like having that flexibility in the spec, I think will be key for making this like a really useful and flexible paradigm.
The discrepancy between like all the 5,000 ways you can define your SLOs, and me like thinking in the back of my mind, okay, and then I'm going to get like an actual manager. They're trying to bootstrap an SRE, and I'm trying, and will I try to explain, and here are the 5,000 ways you can define your SLOs in? Nah, I'll just like pick what's the same default for almost everybody. Pick that. If you run into trouble, then we'll talk. Like
that's a good point. Yeah, like the balancing the simplicity with the flexibility. Yeah.
The level of customization encompassed within the OpenSLO spec, and it's growing as this discussion clearly shows, versus the base needs of most consumers of SLOs. Like the benefit of adopting OpenSLO in this regard is that if you ever do need those other features, they're there. You don't need to change your spec because someone has thought about it already, and like it's in there.
Yeah, I also kind of think it's it will be up to the essentially like the platforms to basically support different levels of functionality. Like if you have that default that is we're adding up all the good and dividing by all the total, and that's just the default for that platform, then every aggregate lands like that. And then if they want, if the platform expands to support other scenarios, then it can, but it doesn't necessarily, need to have that opinion across the spec. It can just be the opinion of the platform, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I also think now that we're going to separate SLIs from SLOs potentially, this could also be a secondary definition, these aggregated SLOs, because you could then just refer to the SLOs in like you have like the normal spec of defining an SLO, and you define SLI, and then you can also have a third one, like the advanced way of doing things, and then you have like the aggregated SLO, and then it's then based on the other SLOs you already have defined, if that makes sense. So it's like this is a secondary spec definition if you want to have aggregated SLOs, and then you have the normal SLO spec, just like the most common approach, and then if you want more advanced dealings, then you can use this other aggregate SLO definition. So not that you combine it in like one big SLO spec, but you do it like separate.
That's an interesting idea. I like that. Am I interpreting it right? And you're saying that like the SLIs would essentially be defined however they are normally, but then you'd have a parent object that could be a regular SLO, or a parent object that could be like an aggregate SLO, and the aggregate SLO might have essentially allow for a collection of SLIs that back it.
Yeah, something like that. Or yeah, now we have this SLO file, and then it can refer to SLIs, and you can also do something similar for these aggregate SLOs. You say, okay, I want to aggregate these SLOs into one new SLO. Then you would go for a similar approach as how you would now refer to an SLI in a normal SLO. Yeah, because I would assume it makes things a bit more clear. That is like two separate things. But maybe I don't understand aggregate SLOs correctly.
No, I think that's kind of the fun of this particular use case, is that there are so many interpretations of what it means to like collect multiple SLOs or SLIs into one.
Yeah.
Green or red.
This is one of the things that we're discovering as we're talking to more and more people, is that like for every person that we talk to about it, there's kind of for each person you talk to, there's the new kind of idea of what an aggregate or composite SLO is.
Yeah, and I think for us, because all of our SLIs are all just count based. It's and we've kind of managed to sell that to the business and sell that to product and to the execs. Like I included a link to that issue. Just excuse the language, because it's kind of tried to be simplified for the audience that I'm writing it for. But but really kind of, because on all of those things we just use count based, we can kind of put together these aggregate SLOs, and we can kind of explain it to everyone and get their buy-in, which I think is super important. Like if we were trying to mix lots of different kind of primitives together, people would sort of lose us, and then, you know, we need their buy-in in order to kind of get that time to work on technical debt issues instead of new product issues and everything like that. And so in our case, it was easy because we just had one type of SLO.
And I think that's,
yeah,
I was gonna say, and I think that's also a key feature too, is that you kind of, you've already normalized the data by using the count based, and versus like some of the things that we were thinking about, like when we were just going with like this, like the kind of like multi SLI setup, is you'd have to normalize the data in some way before being able to, before bringing it into the aggregate SLO.
Well, I think that you kind of can only go in one direction when you do that across different types. If you have both like interval based SLOs and count based SLOs, you can't revert, you can't get back the count data that you already threw out. You only have the intervals. And so if you do have that mix, you essentially have to go towards everything becomes intervals. You evaluate each count interval as its own thing. And then what you end up collecting are just the number of good intervals over the number of total intervals, but you can't really back into the old raw data.
I'm actually considering window performance caching, as in, can I store if I'm calculating a 28-day rolling window, I don't want to have to calculate all the things each time, because that's, for a large fleet of clusters, that's like a ridiculous amount of data. Let's say I want to calculate each hour separately, and then just like every hour fetch the new hour and add the calculations. So what's the amount of data I need to store for each hour to actually be able to then fold it into the 28-day window as a single calculation? And I thought initially that the answer is like, what's the window performance as a float, as in 0.7, 0.9, something. But my coworker pointed out to me that no, because if you're doing not time windows based, but time window budgeted calculations, but count budgeted calculations, then this will be off, because this will like implicitly time window budget the calculations, and you don't want that. So I reverted to why don't I just, for each hour increment, just write down total count, successful count, and then I can like calculate whatever, fully accurately calculate whatever time window, short, long, I can from that, and no like resolution is lost, no error is introduced in the calculations.
Marius, we're doing exactly the same thing on the 28-day window as well. We have recording rules for counting the errors and the totals, or the successes and the totals. And it's funny because it sounds like we ended up exactly the same place.
That's exactly what we built out at Redfin as well. I think we were on like the per minute. We were trying to do like per minute rather than per hour, but we had a lot, I think, fewer facets than you guys do. So it was easy to be like, oh, it's only 525,000 data points a year. Like, that's fine. We're good.
Yeah, I'm speccing this right now, and like, it's not written. There's just the proof of concept code that doesn't do any of the caching yet. It's pretty dumb, but yeah, I like it. That's a very good confirmation that I didn't like make an error. If other people say that, yep, we came to the same conclusion, that's how it should be done.
It was really nice because I was demoing it to our team, and the one guy's a maths PhD, and then at some point he kind of burst out and said, "That's this," and it was some mathematical concept, and I was like, "Okay, I'm glad that you think that," but he kind of thought that it was correct, so I just left it at that. But I was glad.
If you could get the name of the mathematical concept, I could like put it in my spec file, and then no one would have the knowledge to question it.
I have.
It's on the tip of my tongue. Sorry, I'll remember it by the end.
Okay.
I feel like I should represent. I feel like I've talked to Alex Hidalgo about this a lot internally in Olen, And I do think a point that he's slowly convincing me of is that the flip side of this coin is that not everybody thinks about SLOs in raw traffic numbers. A lot of times, especially if they're working backwards from existing monitoring, they're thinking about things in terms of time. And so I do think that that can be a challenge if you are pushing it up to leadership and you're like trying to explain that like this is numbers of requests, and they might not be thinking about numbers of requests. They might be thinking about like minutes per day of healthiness. And so that's the only time when it kind of you might want to have the other option, but it depends on what your business expectations are there.
So
I personally think about it as traffic.
We started off with the executive level, very much thinking about it in terms of minutes of disruption, and it's taken like a lot to turn that ship. But what I find with the minutes of disruption is like when is the disruption over, and at what point do you kind of like say, okay, now things are good, but they're not really perfect. But
so much depends on whether you want to have that like argument now or later kind of vibe, right? Because I think it's like it's really easy to be like, minute at 3 a.m. is probably fine. There's like so few users versus, like, wouldn't you want something that auto balances based on the time of day that is where traffic is heaviest without having to define custom weighting and all that stuff? But yeah, it's just where people are coming from. Sorry, I feel like I have completely tangented this whole discussion about, do we want to run back through the issues, Ian?
I think if unless anybody else has anything, I'd be curious to see the demo that Marius has.
Okay, well, fair warning, it's like I run a script and it like prints 7 lines of text, and then I tell you why that's cool. And like wait,
best demos. I love it.
It's very cool. I promise. Okay, let me.
I'm trusting you here.
Yeah, how to share stuff. Share screen. Okay. I think this is it. You should see a lot of black.
Yep, we see.
Okay, so a system for reading SLO definitions in OpenSLO format. Then you run it every hour, every 24 hours, whatever you configure it. It's not configurable yet, right? It barely works. It connects to, like, parses all the SLOs defined, connects to all the data sources, fetches the data, calculates the SLOs, and then stores them into something. Of course, it should be smart enough to like cache it, etc., etc. That's a song of the future. Once I get approval internally and actually engineering forces behind it, this is just a proof of concept. So SLOs directory, the invalid one is invalid. The SLO one is, please ignore that it says objective metric. It's like my testing. This is the standard thing you'd expect with Prometheus, a source that's like an HTTP thing in Prometheus, PromQL, and a query. Okay, fine. This won't work, by the way, but the others will. This is Python. It uses pandas internally. So it doesn't care what it's ingesting its data from. At some point, it occurred to me that I don't need to have a Prometheus stood up. I can just ingest from CSVs and work on that. So that's what I did. And pandas internally has sort of a query language. So I can even have a single CSV with data and subquery stuff in it, which I like a lot. Actually, I want to show you the other one. This is what you would be used to, like data type. Sorry. Like there's some data. I'll show the data in a second. A query, and it like calculates something. In this case, it's like CPU temperature or something like that. The one addition that we have because it's a use case if you have a fleet of a lot of systems, is the ability to get the data and pick a column in the data, a label in PromQL that is used to differentiate subsystems. So as say a cluster ID, in this case, I'm using the sensor name column in the data, as in the CPU sensor, GPU sensor. And at the end of it, I want to have calculated window performance for the defined window for each subsystem, say separately, and then the combined SLO for the whole thing. And this is like from a business standpoint, like the engineers, the business will want the combined thing. And then the engineers, when they dig into stuff, will want to, okay, so yesterday it looked bad. Tell me exactly why. Oh, those two subsystems were wrong. And then I dig into it. So that's basically it. If I show you the test data, it's basically a representation of a Prometheus time series just in CSV form to ease up on the development. The idea being that this should be able to support anything, whether you ingest from SQL, whether you ingest from Prometheus, from a file, from anything you can think of. If you add a simple layer that that you connect to it, then transform it into an appropriate data frame inside pandas that looks like this, like timestamp, name, etc., then it will work. And so if I run it, it will complain that the invalid ones can be parsed or like something, and then it will, for the two that are correct, it will compute like the window performance and whether it met or didn't meet the SLO. For the one that is supposed to be split, there's a separate line that actually prints per subsystem window performances, and then the total window performance if you like sum up and average the 4 subsystems. This is dynamic. You just specify the column that identifies the subsystems, and then it works its magic and does the thing. It's pandas, so like doing stuff like this is like 3 additional lines of code. I love pandas. And that's the demo. As I said, like more talking than actually showing stuff. The code is public because this is Red Hat.
This is awesome, by the way. I just want to say thank you.
The code.
There's so many questions that
Thanks.
I have. Okay. I mean, all good questions, mostly fanboy questions, but questions.
Okay. We have 10 minutes almost left, so shoot.
So I guess like the target for this is essentially giving devs a way to specify a time range where something happened, and then it'll automatically propagate and show them like of the things that happened. These are the SLOs that sort of breached, and you're just basically like giving. They specify like yesterday between 1 and 3, and then it auto like long term. This would retrieve the data from the data sources, evaluate that time, and say these are the ones that failed. Is that right?
Yeah. Like it would store the thing that like just output it to the console. This will be stored in an SQL database. So every time this crunches some data, it updates the SQL database with the new info. So then it can be ETL'd into any processing pipeline for the SLOs, SLIs you want to, or just Grafana, because like Grafana can do SQL as a source, or ingest it in Tableau. We use that as well. Or like in a large enough organization, you have like multiple ways to crunch data and like use it.
My other question was kind of around the pandas setup, because one of the things that I've been thinking about is trying to find a good way to set up essentially like gold files for certain scenarios where you'd want to, this is a specific, this is a traffic pattern that would result in these particular air budget burns and this type of an alert. And from your setup with Pandas, like that seems like something that would work right out of the box there, being able to read in from a CSV that was a specified sort of traffic pattern of like SLI data. And then you could be like, yep, this failed the alert exactly the way you expected. And then you could like run those side by side against different I think that there was a discussion we had a little while back where we were describing the different error budget methods and like what that would result in. And I would love to have that gold file to be able to say like, here's this exact scenario when you run it, when you showcase against these 3 different error budget methods, or you add a new one, like this is kind of the outcomes and these are the differences. And
the cool thing about like when hiring a software engineer, the best thing they can tell you is that they love tests and they write a lot of tests. But if that's not the case, at least they should say that they feel very bad whenever they're not writing the tests, because that's like a good look for them. So this doesn't have tests, but because the pandas is used internally, that means that anytime I want to add some very weird crunching, like the OpenSLO spec will be able to specify some very esoteric way of defining something. With this, you can like generate the CSV file and know what the outcomes should be, and just write a unit test that will verify that the code always for that CSV file verifies the thing you want to do. So like, yeah,
like I love the idea of being able to capture that live performance from whatever the Prometheus data was, and then pipe that to a bunch of different interpretations of the SLI data to say like which alerts would have notified me when I want to be notified, and which alerts would have notified me too late, and which ones would have basically like let my operator sleep for a little bit longer. Like that would be so cool.
Brilliant, actually.
Well, it feels like that's what your setup kind of enables, right? Like since you've already got that prom data in there, like if you were just able to snapshot the historical prom data from a real incident, and then you could pipe those SLIs to different interpretations, then that becomes your guidance for like which.
I totally thought of that before this time. That was my totally that was my intention. Yeah. And I'll totally
I'm a big fan.
Say that. Yeah, whenever someone in Red Hat asks me about stuff, and I'll explain this idea, and it's totally my idea.
It's the Marius method. I love it. I'm so excited.
So
yeah, you're right. Huh.
There's a I've got a similar thing with pandas, and I needed some test data from Prometheus. But just one thing that I found worked really well is you export it as Parquet, because then you get the types get maintained on the data. And there's also a Prometheus pandas, which is super basic library, but it just connects pandas to your Prometheus data source.
Red Hat has, like a guy at Red Hat developed like a year ago a Prometheus client library that is smart enough to, because like you can't ingest from Prometheus more than like, I don't know, 10,000 time series at a time. So it's really sucks for calculating SLOs on like a monthly or quarterly basis. So a guy like developed a simple Python library that works around it. You just tell it to like ingest it in chunks of 5 hours or something like that, and it ingests it in chunks, then puts it in a large data frame, and you don't have to care about it at all.
We've got it. I'll send you a link to this thing. We've got exactly the same thing there as well, because mainly because our Thanos is so unreliable that we look for 365 days of data, and like trying to query for that, it's like there's just no chance. So we do a day at a time, and then we build up the data frame. And that's funny. I'll send a link to that as well.
If you write the SLI data to graphite, your space is predictable. Your like replication factor makes it really easy to read as much as you want, because it's just it's like basic Whisper. It's not, you wouldn't use it for anything else, but for your SLI data, it's pretty good.
So I just wanted to ask Mike if I was understanding what you were describing, is you could almost use this tool as a SLI modeler to determine what your targets and rates should be based on historic incidents.
Yeah, and like, I mean, to me, like, I think that's definitely like the first case I think folks would think about. The one that I'm imagining is I want to write a bunch of different alert evaluation methods, essentially like budgets, or like different ways to crunch the budget, and having that standard data set definitely gives you the way to like configure your thresholds, maybe not your thresholds, but like your targets and stuff. But you could also write an entirely new just interpretation approach and see how that compares to the other ones. I think like Marius and I were discussing, like, again, like the weighted time slice versus the raw count versus the regular count. And then you could also do things where you have, like automatic weighting. And then you were able to say, based on the model from your last month's worth of traffic, we automatically weighted everything for you. And based on that automatic weighting, here's when that would have fired. And then you can, sort of build your own cool stuff. Like it's just a fast feedback mechanism without having to wait for the next incident, which,
No, that
it'll
sounds good.
happen.
This is an awesome discussion, by the way. I want to thank everyone for that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your patented Marius
Yeah.
approach. I love it. I'm so excited for you to publish it.
Well, we got 1 minute until the top of the hour. Was there anything else that anybody wanted to bring up in that time?
Slow conf is gonna be great. Everyone should go. It's gonna be super party.
Yeah.
I think it's async too. It'll probably be async like last year. So time zone friendly.
Cool. All right. Well, I appreciate it, everyone. And thank you. All right. See y'all next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.